Hello, Curio. Hey, did you see that last fight in the contest? Yeah, I know. I'm very surprised as well. I didn't. Who would have thought that Destro Gallagher's weakness would be behind his back? I know. That Sphinx yonder lady, she's quite impressive with that jet of hers. Yeah, yeah. I look forward to that fight between Zagros and Jenny everywhere. Yeah, and I'm curious about who the Blue Knight of Time will face. Yeah. Have you been able to contact Jack? Ah, all right. It must have been another lockdown, bad reception and all. Okay. Okay. Well, let me know if anything does happen, and I'll let you know if anything happens at my end. All right. Okay. All right. Bye. Ah. Hello and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. You know, in the past couple of months, I've been mentioning an album or two by Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, so I think it kind of comes full circle to talk about an album by who are considered the true forefathers of heavy metal, Black Sabbath. For those not entirely in the know, Black Sabbath was founded and established by guitarist Tommy Iommi, drummer Bill Ward, vocalist Ozzy Osbourne, and bassist Geezer Butler, back in around 1968, under a few various names such as the Polka Talk Blues Band and Earth. And as you can imagine, they didn't really entirely last long with either names, so they decided to name their band after the particular English title of an obscure Italian horror film called Black Sabbath, starring or rather Boris Karloff. And by 1970, they released their title album, Black Sabbath, and Paranoid, both of which proved to be very influential and proved to be quite successful. And today we're looking at the third album that they made, released back in 1971, just over 50 years ago. And that album happens to be called Master of Reality. Beginning the album is the song Sweet Leaf, a classic yet very catchy metal song of the 70s that's about the love between the band and basically pot, weed, cannabis, marijuana, and all that. Just as you can tell from both the title and some of its lyrics. In fact, it begins with the sound of Tommy Iommi himself kind of coughing from smoking a joint, and it being looped over and over a bit before we actually kickstart into the song itself. Now, I don't think it's actually saying that weed is good, weed is fine, and all that. But I think it kind of more like a tragic relationship between a person and a particular drug. How they start becoming attached to them, like almost manifesting and personifying them, and how eventually they would kind of lead into their downfall. And in fact, with these lyrics, the music kind of help that by having this a continuing yet very catchy riff. Even halfway through, where we get some really good drum rolling from Bill Ward, this song kind of helps. The song kind of inspired and influenced the stoner rock genre that will come and become popular, especially in the 90s. And 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 to those out there who have had actual weed, marijuana, and all that, I think you I think this is a good song to listen to while you're high as a frigging kite or something. Although you'd probably know about it already. Next is After Forever, though I gotta say what it is exactly that comes after Forever, since it's, well, you know, forever. Anyways, this song is rather one of the more interesting and unique of heavy metal songs of this era, since it deals with very heavy Christian themes, referencing, mentioning God in Christ, and almost speaking from the point of view of a Christian preacher, saying stuff like that God's the only way to love, or it's people like you who crucified Christ. While the music here was mostly written by Tony Iommi, the lyrics themselves were written by Geezer Butler, who proclaimed himself to be a Catholic Christian, which is very something to grab your attention, since bands like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and, well, Iron Maiden and other heavy metal bands of the 70s and 80s have often been accused of being Satanists, not just because of the lyrics, just because that some Christians didn't really like the music, or they thought that just because they used occult symbols in their artwork, they just thought they were devil worshippers without, considering context. So, so in a way, a song like this is probably could be considered one of the first Christian metal songs, which, if so, then it's probably one of the best Christian musics I've heard in a while. Not exactly something I'd hear in my church, but if they did, I would go there any day. At the same time, though, I seem to believe that this is also kind of a comment on the hypocrites who claim to be Christian but decide to live personal, worldly lives, kind of calling them out on their hypocritical behavior, their do as I say, don't do as I do kind of attitude. The whole practice what you preach is what I think this song is also kind of saying. And aside from the lyrics, the music itself is still very classic Black Sabbath. It still has those catchy, very metallic, very deep guitars, and it's another good song that I think deserves more better appreciation even from hardcore Black Sabbath fans. Next is Embryo, a very short instrumental piece clocking about 28 seconds. It pretty much consists of nothing more than just a long yet very kind of quick guitar riff, presumably by Tony himself. It is a very quiet yet very ominous kind of chunky piece of guitar music. It kind of gives off this suspenseful feeling like you think you're alone, but again you're not quite too sure, and it also kind of gives off the imagery of waiting for something, like waiting to be born or something, as kind of represented by the title of Embryo, and that title which may be in some way a sort of connection to the next song, whose title happens to be Children of the Grave. Closing out the first side of the album, Children of the Grave kind of continues on the anti-war themes of War Pigs from the Paranoid album, although instead of comparing the act of war itself, specifically the conflict in Vietnam, to the night of Walpurgis, this song kind of addresses children and how easily victimized they are in the midst of wars and like conflicts, and just sheer uneasiness of how it all provokes, and it also goes into how children can be easily impressionable, easily manipulated into believing that war can be used for a good cause, regardless of whatever consequences or reasons they may be for it, and how they should just follow orders and just fight the good fight until they'll eventually find themselves dead in the middle of a battlefield, ending up, as they'd say, children of the grave. The music also helps in capturing that kind of intensity. Aside from the awesomeness of Tony Iommi's guitars and the distinct vocals of Ozzy Osbourne, we also have Bill Ward's percussion, which in this case kind of sounds like he's kind of tapping his drumsticks on like the sides of the drums or some kind of cardboard or wood or something, giving off this kind of shall I say, very clattery feeling, almost giving off the imagery of bullet fire, also to represent the kind of sound that would emit. And then there's the brief middle part here where the drums and the guitar kind of slow down for a bit, and it gets, for lack of a better word, very heavy with those smashing cymbals, and the guitars get really screechy and really thrashing before it kind of goes back to the status quo of the overall quick-paced guitar riffs. And eventually, it all closes out with this intense drum roll by Bill Ward, and it kind of drifts around for a bit with that kind of rippling guitar notes and a bit of those chi things that almost sounds like something out of Friday the 13th or something. It is for like it's the closest to what I would consider a last note nightmare, and it's a good way to close out the first side without actually overblowing other tracks of the album. Side 2 begins with Orchid, another short instrumental piece, this time unlike say Embryo, which was still very heavy and still very chunky as I mentioned. Orchid is much more lighter, more softer, much more acoustic, and 3 times as long at about a minute and 31 seconds. It has this kind of soothing yet still slightly eerie feeling to it. It almost gives me a vibe of Steve Hackett's guitars from from his years at Genesis, and it is a good way to continue this first side after listening to a lot of heavy, dark songs. It's good to have a bit of a breather, have a bit of a calm mood after all so much rocking and metal and all that. It's very, if you ever heard it first time without actually knowing anything about Black Sabbath, or at least or kind of never or at least haven't been told that this was Black Sabbath, you would never guess firsthand that this was a Black Sabbath song. It is that very different and that unique, and it does definitely stick out from the rest of their more heavy metal songs, be they more well-known ones or more lesser-known and obscure ones. Anyway, that leads us into the next song, Lord of this World. A return to form of the previous songs on this album. This one also kind of comments on some of the religious aspects of the world and the culture back then in the late 60s and early 70s. This time it seems to speak from the point of view of possibly the devil himself, and how he sees humanity as easily manipulatable, how easily they can be exploited out of their own desires, and also a bit of a comment of how people will do anything to get to the top of the class, or on top of just business overall, just would give anything, even their soul, to make big money, get fame and fortune, and just without any regard for any consequences that may come of it. And how they could easily make, well, a deal with the devil, like the fable of Faust. When Ozzy sings lyrics such as "can't find the key to fit the lock in your heart," or "your soul's ill but you can't find the cure," it seems to refer to how sometimes people can become irredeemable, how their souls are just beyond repenting. And when we get to the chorus of Lord of this world, evil possessed and all that, it may not just refer to the devil himself or Satan or whatever, but also possibly people in power, how they will do, how well, they will do anything to keep themselves in power, even if it means twisting truths and tricking people into believing that whatever they do, whatever they believe, are all for a righteous cause. Even if it's religious leaders like popes, vicars, priests, and all that. The road to hell is paved with good intention. In terms of the music, Geezer Butler, the bassist, is at his best here. Beneath the screeching guitars of Tony and the almost tinny drums of Bill, his bass can clearly be heard underlaying it all, almost plucking and I dare to say almost subliminal that, which I think helps visually or rather auditorily represent the themes of manipulation and the devil's whispering in your ears and all that. I think it's also a way to show that Black Sabbath aren't just devil worshippers as one may see them as at first glance, but as a way to kind of show how they can sing like good Christians, even though not all of them are, but they do have good beliefs and they're not just evil for the sake of evil. Next is Solitude. Very, very different from what you'd expect from a Black Sabbath song, is how I would describe this particular song. Almost just as much as Orchid. This one is very mellow, yet very dark and very, I almost say, almost gothic in a sense. At both its lyrics and the music. Lyrically, it seems to go on about how this person has lost this companion, this lover, if you will, whether in a breakup or he's actually mourning over her death at like a funeral or something, and he's kind of all swelled up and broken by it, and kind of just almost giving up on life, saying that his name means nothing, his fortune's less, the future's shrouded in darkness, and ever since they kind of went away, he's never stopped crying, he's never stopped feeling so much grief and sorrow. And the music really helps in giving that kind of emotion. The very heavy thrashing guitars are set aside as Tony instead plays this elegant yet very eerie flute along with a bit of a piano. Geezer still has his traditional bass, and Bill Ward goes away from the drums and instead plays some little sleigh bells. Probably the few times I would consider sleigh bells to not be Christmas associated, but instead daring say something for a dark song like this. And in terms of vocals, apparently Ozzy still sings this one, but I wouldn't be able to tell just first going into this, just listening at first impression, and I highly doubt anyone, even with good ears, would be able to tell it was Ozzy at first listening. And it almost kind of, as I might say, it kind of feels like a darker, more bleak version of Ain't No Sunshine. All in all, Solitude is a very dark and depressing waltz with a very eerie and all-around sorrowful mood. But anyway, that brings us to the last song of the album, Into the Void. Technically the longest song of the album at about 6.25 minutes, and that may not be saying much since most of the songs in this album, aside from the two instrumentals, are roughly about just 5 minutes long. A best way I could think of to describe this finale is downright apocalyptic, almost literal doom metal. And in terms of lyrics, I would kind of consider this space metal, as it deals with this voyage of a starship kind of escaping this dying Earth as it falls under the sways of pollution and warfare, as the ship kind of travels across the galaxy and the universe searching for a new planet that could be sustainable for life, that we would learn not to harm and damage like with Earth. And in a way, both musically and lyrically, it does remind me a bit of early Hawkwind and even a bit of Motorhead in terms of it when it gets really fast and really speedy. And all around, it does feel like a good send off and a good culmination of many of the recurring themes of the songs that come before it. How it kind of goes into detail of its rocket engines burning so much fuel, how Earth is dying, the land and the seas are kind of getting all dirty from all that pollution that we've been causing, and he even mentions a bit of mentions Satan and his slaves, as if this is almost a bit of an Armageddon in a way, which is kind of like the biblical interpretation of apocalypse, and kind of representing how much we've sinned and how it's represented by, well, this kind of pollution. And all in all, it is a good send off to this album. And all in all, Master of Reality by Black Sabbath is all around a classic heavy metal album on par with the first two albums and a lot of the albums that would come ahead in Black Sabbath's history. If you're not really into heavy metal, you may not be into this kind of stuff, but if you really love the classic metal music and you like to know where it all started and how a lot of bands nowadays got their influence, I'd say give this one a listen. It's actually one of the shorter albums, if not the shortest of Black Sabbath's albums, at about 34 minutes. If if I were to nitpick in that respect, it could do with another song or two to fill in like 10 minutes extra to make it more of a slightly longer, more conventional album. But this was at a time where Black Sabbath were kind of just kind of to find their sound, kind of find their staple in the early 70s heavy metal scene. So you can imagine, and plus Black Sabbath were you kind of known for kind of recording their whole albums within like days or weeks or so. So having a recorder in the longer term can, I guess, cause some interesting results, like a shorter length, ironically. But if you want to listen to something that has a quick pace, goes by so fast, and also feels like the musical equivalent of a thrill ride, I say give the Master Reality a bit of a listen, and maybe you won't need a bit of a weed to get yourself stoned. Next time we begin August by looking at another album by another former member of Genesis, and one you may or may not expect.
Yes? Ah, Anorak. What is it this time? The contest. What about it? Destrogalga? Defeated? Ah, that's so. Well, no worries there. Our masters may still have some good use for him. And don't worry about any potential weaknesses. I'm sure our master will figure out a way to perfect them for him. just like with Levidian Skarn, and possibly Heavy Rex. Right. That contest won't last forever, my friend. It will come to an end, and we'll have some potential pawns in our game. And these warriors that oppose us will know their place. Affirmative. Find and gather the others. I will send this message to our master. Over and out.